Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of the ESAC podcast. Will be hosted by none other than myself, Scotsman. Joining me today, I have some illustrious guests for you to enjoy listening to. First of all, we have the Huntmania Meister himself, NMD. Would you care to introduce yourself to those who may not know you previously?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say thanks to actually being a guest on a podcast because some of you might know me as the host of the TrackMania podcast. Besides that, the past year I tried to bring some attention to the game by giving coverage in terms of the podcast, event interviews, articles, video series, and so on. So I guess that's my role in TrackMania. And just for your information, I don't play the game myself, so I have no information about skills and stuff like that.
Thank you very much. And secondly, last but certainly not least, we have joining us from M&M Nevermind. Would you also care to enlighten the viewers as to yourself?
Thanks for having me, Scottie. This is actually quite new for me as a podcast. I'm basically the team captain of M&M Gaming, the TrackMania team. I hope we're going to tackle this subject together.
Yeah, we've got a hell of a subject to tangle. We've got something to tackle here, and it is the subject at hand will be TrackMania Champions League. Has been the word on everyone's lips recently with all the kind of discussions that have been had on their Discord and between private and publicly, pretty much everywhere you can find in TrackMania at the moment. So, a little run through. TrackMania Champions League was introduced to us by Ubisoft Nadeo and also featuring Softy B, who you may know previously from TMWC and, of course, TMPL. But we'll start ourselves off. We'll, of course, go on to explain the details of what TrackMania Champions League is in just a second. But first of all, guys, when you heard the announcement that both Ubisoft Nadeo and Softy, of course, as I said, coming from TMPL and TMWC, were going to be working together, what kind of expectations did that give for you? Starting with yourself, NMD.
Okay, I can go back to actually before the actual announcement because there was a long period of time where we knew that there was something planned, but we didn't know what. I was kind of hyped because for every event Softy B has hosted, something has been bigger. Because he came to me back in 2016 with the suggestion of hosting the ESAC team tournament. I didn't believe in that tournament back then, so I was not on board. But since then, he has proven me wrong every time that he can do something, and when he do it, it's normally bigger for every time. And that was also my idea going into this announcement, that what was going to be announced was probably going to be bigger than TrackMania Pro League. It's probably going to be bigger than TrackMania World Championship. So I was thinking maybe multiple lands or TrackMania into other lands, maybe in the Netherlands and stuff like that. But when the event itself was announced, I was a little bit confused, I would say. I was not expecting it. I had heard nothing of it. But as for normal, I'm open to new ideas. But I guess my main problem was how the slots was given out. I didn't understand why, let's say, the weirdest reason for me was Czech and Slovakia having just one spot in the start when you had the top two players from the previous event, TrackMania World Championship. They were top two. So that was my main problem in the start. But as we went along, I guess that problem went okay because Czech and Slovakia ended up with two slots. That was my first impression and the sort of expectations before the actual announcement.
Yeah, I can imagine it set quite a precedent seeing some of the information that was put out there as well. Never mind, if I can ask, going into this, seeing that Ubisoft Nadeo and Softy B were coming together, it's kind of the first time we'd been seeing this. Based upon what you saw from the announcements and such, were you having high hopes going into this? Was there hype for you as being part of this before you heard a bit more of the finer details, or were you more reserved awaiting more information?
To be honest, participating in all of the TMPL seasons, including not really the World Cup because that was only the LAN itself. I was really hyped for it, And to be honest, when they announced it, I was already on the registration page. And then while I was reading the rules and everything, then I hold it a bit back because I realized maybe I should just see what's up first. But I was really hyped for it. Then, after watching a bit how the guys were playing the maps, tried the maps a bit myself. Just wanted a few more days to see where it goes first. And yes, I agree with NMD. I also didn't like the national repartition quite at all, like not at all. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, it certainly gave us a few points to discuss there, especially with the nations repetition and things like that. But first things first, with the nations repetition, it did present us a few issues, but also one of the most interesting things seemingly coming into this, which has not been a part of any TrackMania tournament beforehand, was the champions mode of what had been introduced. And as a new mode coming into TrackMania, I'll give you guys a bit of a rundown from this here. So, quick explanation of the champions mode. So, it's based upon laps. The laps will be depending on the track. So, of course, a smaller track length, you will have more laps, and the other way around, of course. And going forward on this, you'd be getting points depending on your positions. Of course, much as the same it is for your recognisable rounds or cup modes, with first place getting 20 points, second 12, third 8, 4, 6, and so on and so forth, gradually descending as you get further behind in the pack. However, with the very notable point in this, that players that are between 9th and 16th position would lose all of their points won on previous races. However, they'll still keep the points they've gained on that track. So, never mind, as you, of course, have been one who has been participating a lot more in these tournaments, I suppose, might have a bit more experience in the field of that than NMD. What did you think when you heard of this new mode being introduced, and how did you think that would affect a tournament format?
At first, it felt quite ambiguous, but while reading the example and then thinking about it a bit, felt more like something that doesn't really fit with what you're supposed to do in this. I mean, I understand the point behind it because you have to be consistent through all the maps you play. But at the same time, you say that you want to bring new players into this. I don't think that's a way to bring new players into this, because this requires a lot of concentration and quite high skill for the kind of competition you're going into.
Mhm.
And I personally didn't like the idea, but I'm pretty sure other players liked it, I guess. I don't know. Because you could do well in the first 1 or 2 maps, and then on the last or the second to last, you could lose all your points and end up last, basically. And that's not really nice. As you could see, even in the qualifiers, a bug could happen, and you could lose your points based on that.
Mm-hmm. You were saying there when it came about with the new mode, also introducing more to look more appealing to new players coming in, new spectators and such like that. Were the first feelings you got from this new format something you think would support it, or say looking at it from the outside in, did you feel kind of more confused after it being initiated and brought in?
I was a bit confused at first, but seeing the test, I think there was a test phase. Yeah, the one that I watched didn't seem that really complicated, and the plugin that's in place also helps with the understanding of it. So I think people will get it pretty easily. But yeah, I don't know, this viewer focus that is trying to be achieved, because I think the format itself becomes boring because you don't see all the cars all the time, and it's like one mistake and it's over for one player all the time in these races.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's quite boring up until the last laps, unless you have a close fight. I think it's way too many laps, or the maps are too short.
Yeah, that's a good point. NMD, going into this, do you feel the kind of confusion, so to speak, was worth it? in regards to them working towards bringing in a new system? Or, as I understand you're saying, of course, you're quite open to new ideas. Or do you think with the format we have for TrackMania Champions League, which of course it will go into a stage of 10 individual stages going forward, do you think this Champions mode has a chance of working with that? Or would you have rather seen one of our more established rule sets, say Cup mode or rounds?
Okay, so I guess that's a two-part question. If I like the Champions mode and if I would prefer this Champions mode in this league. First, I would, from what I understand, Softy B planned this Champions mode to be used in a league phase, so not in a qualification. So that's why you didn't see it taking place in the qualifiers. However, you saw that the people who failed the last map got knocked out anyway. I'm open for the idea, of course, but I think this format would, of course, benefits the best. But when it comes to it, if they make a mistake, they'll pretty much be fucked over by it. They can do 4 good maps, and then the last map they are unlucky or is the least favorite one, and that will be the end result. So I think if the goal is to crown the best player in the game, it will probably not be this mode. I would favor the normal, let's say, rounds mode with finalist mode. But then, of course, the finalist mode also have this history of maybe not being the mode that crowns the best player. Someone catch up. So I guess you have the pros and cons with both, modes. But I know too little about the Champions mode. I have seen too little of it in real life. I will see it play out in the beta season before giving a judgment. But as I said, I'm open for it, but I'm, to be honest, a little bit skeptical.
Mm-hmm. It's a key point again to note that this is a brand new mode which has been introduced, which I think is an important point to raise, as you're saying there. And as well, Softy in his communication towards the Discord did highlight, look guys, this is something new that's coming in. It needs to have its chance to shine, so to speak. Gillies has also had his parts in the discussion, basically saying, look, when we first introduced Cup mode, everyone was against it and everyone was confused by it. Give it its chance to sink in and things like that. Give it its chance to shine and such like that. Now, another point of this format, there's two kind of separate points we can go on to here. One, which will affect how the TrackMania scene will kind of progress through the next few weeks and months, I feel, is the 10 stages I was talking about. Now, these stages will be played every Sunday. They will be played pretty much roughly the same time. And it will be kind of every 2 weeks, starting actually from the 3rd of February. So you guys definitely don't have long to wait if you are looking forward to your next dose of TrackMania Champions League action. However, one of the key points to take into account with these dates can coincide with, at the very least, training for such important LAN events. Gaming Winterfest, I believe, will be on the step 3, which is the 3rd of March. And Gamers Assembly also may be affected. Now, never mind, I've of course heard there is plans for yourself to be attending LAN events. So had you been in this situation, as I understand you've played through TMPL, being as part of a long league stage as well, how do you think this would affect the quality of both the LAN events which will be played and the Champions League itself? Do you think both of them coinciding with each other might cause issues in regards to the quality we'll see?
I guess it mainly depends on how demanding the maps will be for the Champions League. As I see them right now, I really don't know. I guess people should have to make a call between them when it comes to it. I didn't play the new maps that were out for the first stage, but I've seen spam streaming them, and I don't know what to think, to be honest. But if somebody wants to become good on such maps, I guess it will take some practice. So for a LAN colliding, I guess people will have to make the call to choose what to aim for.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose the nature with such a big project as this is that it may result in other such things having some small issues. I mean, NMD, from what you've seen of the maps, do you think the styles might make that a bit better in the sense that, of course, these LAN events will be focused on shall we say, high skill based ceilings of maps. So, your tech maps, your high level dirt, full speed maps, and so on. With the theme of the map, shall we say, of course, the quality is another discussion, but the theme of the map seems to be a bit. Do you think that will make the transition for such players who do intend on doing both? Do you think that will contribute to making it easier, or do you see issues still forthcoming?
Okay, so I don't know how long players would need to use on actually training the maps, but if you're looking for diversity, like you're training for Gaming Winterfest, like I know Kappa has signed up, and Kappa is also one of the 16 champions. I guess if he wants to have a little bit of break between training for, let's say, Gaming Winterfest, he can then train the TrackMania Champions League and play completely different maps, and vice versa. Once he trains a Champions League, and he's bored of those tracks, he can go back to, let's say, normal tracks and normal competitions. If I guess that's one of the maybe good parts about this map pack, but that might be the only good part so far about the map packs, because from what I've seen from the players who actually knows how they feel, and from people like myself who just use them and see players playing on them, I guess what the current map pack is not what TrackMania is and what TrackMania for a long time has been represented as, and what we have seen in competitions. Because in my eyes, maps is sort of the ID of and the face of every competitions. Hosters send out a map request, and the maps will determine how good or bad an event is. It will determine how hard an event is and how easy it is. And at the moment, I'm not sure what this event is, because from my understanding, some mappers were contacted after, I believe, SoftDB contacted Spam to ask for the best mappers for his endurance race. And some mappers built maps for this event, some of the best in the game. But if I'm reading this correctly, Gillies himself said those maps were too confusing for the, let's say, average viewer or potential viewer. So the current maps are all built by TrackMania CL, so Nadeo staff. I don't know who it is, but people are assuming it's Gillies himself. I don't want to jump to that conclusion without asking him. But if that's the fact that a guy who is a developer suddenly jumps into the scene and builds maps and says that people who has built maps for, let's say, 10 years cannot do what he is doing at the moment, I'm not sure that's the right way to go. But from what I also understand, the maps is a point that they are looking to improve, and a statement will follow. And I'm looking forward for the podcast I will do with SoftDB to get some answers tomorrow. But yeah, I guess the question was if this was good for the players who attend to both. I'm not sure if there's too many players attending to both, actually. From my understanding, not too many people will attend to Gaming Winterfest. Maybe just Kappa will attend to both. So let's see. From what I understand, he will attend to both and go full ham and full serious on both events. So I guess it's good in that way that you have some diversity.
Yeah, diversity, I suppose, is one of the key points I didn't take into account. As I mean, from training for LAN events myself, and I'm sure nevermind putting a lot of practice into TMPL, such team tournaments and things like that. It does have its times where you're sitting there thinking, I've put like 6 hours into one map in a night. I want to do something else. I want to break it up. So yes, it's a good point you introduced there. But talking about the people who do actually, who have that decision to make for themselves, it was decided by the qualifiers we did have recently, which is also a key point of contention, it must be said, when the TrackMania Champions League was first announced, namely the way they were deciding the qualifiers this time. So the way they were going to be deciding the qualifiers, for those who were not previously aware, was going to be country-based. So back in ESWC's past, you may have seen, for example, the Norwegian qualifier, which Bergie often benefited from, and also a French qualifier. So for this one, I'll run you guys through the slot allocation and the areas of which we're corresponding to. So we had UK and Ireland being given one slot. We had Hungary, Romania, Croatia, Bulgaria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Greece and Turkey being allocated one spot. Russia, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Belarus, and Ukraine being allocated one slot. Poland being allocated one slot. Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland, I believe that is, allocated one slot. The Iberian region, so to speak, of Spain, Portugal, and also Italy being allocated one slot. Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Slovenia, one slot. The Benelux region, of course, the Netherlands, Belgium, and also including at Luxembourg, 2 slots. Germany, Austria, and Switzerland being allocated 2 slots. France with 3. North America, of course, Canada including that. Mexico had 1 slot, and the whole continent, so to speak, of South America being allocated 1 slot. Now, before we kind of go on to who should have been part of that and things like that, I'd like to bring the next part of this to you, NMD. Notably, we had some places missing from that. We had places like Australia missing from that, and actually, kind of if we generalise it, the whole left side of the planet, so to speak, with Asia and Australia being missing. What were your thoughts on seeing what was missing and what was included? First of all,
Okay, so I pretty much spoke. The strongest voice I had in this is that by the first look, you had just 1 slot for the Czech and Slovakian players, which I already said. It's, to me, outrageous. You had the top 2 players at the TrackMania World Championship. Sure, you cannot probably draw a straight conclusion to TrackMania World Championship and to this event, but I at least think you should consider it. And then you also have Danik B, who finished 9th at that World Cup. And yeah, there were some problems with, let's say, Asia and Australia not being in. Of course, you should include everyone if you want to host a cup like this, but for me, that is not my biggest problem, because I don't see anybody there who could become one of the winners. I want to be quite honest. I just want to see the best players in the game play against each other. That's what I like. I want to see how good TrackMania players can be and who the best really is. And to be honest, I don't think these 16 players are the best players for this mode. But I understand that this slots is given out based on potential viewership, and also they take the skill from the players in the region into an account. So I guess that's why we ended up with it. And yeah, it might work out, but you also saw some rather boring qualifiers. You had the first one was Pack, who had a rather easy one, and it was the first qualifier, so I enjoyed it because then you can see how good Pack really is. Because when he drives, let's say, the grand final against Kappa, Tween, and Carl Jr., you sort of just assume that that is how good players are. But when you look at a player like R2K, who might be average, he's certainly better than me, getting totally wrecked by Pack. That was okay that it was the first one, but then after you see multiple qualifiers just standing between 1 and 2 players, I don't really think you saw the potential of this Champions mode and how thrilling it can be when 16 players are racing close to each other. I think we saw, let's say, a glimpse of that when you saw the German qualifier, Austrian and Switzerland, and also the French qualifier. You saw how close it could be and how crucial one mistake could be. So after that match, I was kind of back on it, being positive about this cup. And then ending in the last qualifier was Carl Jr., which ended in a time attack hunting session, getting the world records. I believe he got 2 of the 3 world records, so that's good for him. But the funny thing, I did like an overall view of the times, and who would guess that Carl Jr. is number 16 when you add all the times together from the qualifiers. I will not put my money on it, but I will certainly not put my money on him being last in the qualifiers, or in the season itself, sorry.
Oh, well, for sure. I mean, a player of his capability, we can assume, is only just getting started. But never mind, to bring you into this part of things, NMD was, of course, beginnings and the mentionings there of the slots allocation also being decided as a result of the potential viewership and things like that. Would you have preferred to have seen the more established ways we had of getting such players into an event, like, of course, say example, the Mania Planet World Cup, where it was just a big qualifier, some players were invited and such like that. Do you welcome the country's slots idea? I mean, regardless of it, the kind of issues with what players might go where and things like that, or do you think as the way forward we should be kind of looking for a format like this?
I think it would have been much better to be like before with a big qualifier where each player can there will be the top 16 best that can make it out, instead of how this happened. And everybody complained about slot issues, I suppose, and we've seen that not always the favorites got into it.
If I can I jump in here? If I try to put myself in the shoes of the organizers, I guess they are trying to get their regions a face and a chance to be playing against the best. And I guess that's a way to introduce new audience. They know that a player in that region is good. They, let's say, attract, or they see themselves in him almost. I mean, Norway is a country that is crazy about chess just because the best chess player is from Norway. If there wasn't a good chess player from Norway, we wouldn't watch it. So I guess that's a way to bring in viewers. But I guess the end goal or the result will be that these players who, quote unquote, shouldn't be in there, they will probably be wrecked by, let's say, the best players and maybe end up with 0 points. And I'm not sure if that benefits anyone besides the guys winning it and maybe having an easier time if the 16 best players were in the competitions.
Yeah, but you mentioned that the best chess player is in Norway. It's quite a difference between an average player of the region, or
100%,
just
100%.
compared to the rest. So I don't think that will bring in a lot of viewers if the representative of the region is just average.
Of course. Now, what I thought was an interesting thing to look at as well on this, I mean, despite we had some issues, I believe some of the slots were changed over when the amount of registrations for the South American region was so low that they decided to add another slot onto the Czechoslovakian region. Now, with something I did note about the qualifiers, though, which was a bit refreshing, is at least people wanting to compete in the qualifier they were part of. Like the example you gave there, despite the low player count in the UK and Ireland qualifier, and the same could be said for quite a few of the other qualifiers, there were still people trying who realistically they do realise that they wouldn't have necessarily had a chance of winning with the kind of players they were going up against. But I thought it was nice to see some players still having a qualifier for their nation. They wanted to be part of it and they wanted to try for it, regardless of the possibilities of winning, of course. And for those players who were a bit more established in the game, they did even have the opportunity to present, to make a bit of a surprise, as the amount of players, their level that they were typically having to go against would have been limited this time, I suppose, by the fact that, of course, they're not going up against the rest of the world. They're only going up against players who are in the same region. So I guess it did afford opportunities to some people. On the other side of things, you did have some regions that were basically locked out by one spectacular player. Of course, the North American regions, along with Mexico, you have a three-time world champion to coincide against. I can imagine some established players from that region would possibly hesitate before going for that. Same with the UK and Ireland, of course. 2016 world champion Pac, of course, from there. That's certainly not a player that many people are going to fancy their chances against. But, I mean, it was it had its positives and it had its negatives, I suppose. I guess it just depends on what side of the track you are on. But to actually run through who did qualify, so from Great Britain we had Pac from Gamers Origin. From Croatia we had Sky. Poland we had Runtime Macy. From the Lithuania we had Bits. Portugal we had Zburst. And from Denmark we had Dunster. And Czech Republic, we had Kappa. Also from Czech Republic, we had Danik B. Belgium, we had Scrappy. The Netherlands, Spam. Roland, representing Pulse from Austria. Dexter from Germany. Trio of Frenchies, we have Bren, Cappuccino, and Papu. And as aforementioned, three-time world champion Carl Jr. Now, never mind, when you first, if you regardless of whether or not you actually watched the qualifiers at all, looking at that list of names, is there any notable exceptions to that or notable additions to that that you did not expect when this was first announced?
Well, I guess the main surprise was Dunste and also Rollin, who made it out of the German qualifier, or the German, Austrian, and so on. These were the surprises. I didn't see the Nordic qualifier, so I don't know how Dunste won or how Mi4 failed, I suppose. I don't know. I didn't see, so I have no idea. Maybe Dunste was really good. But I've seen the one with the German and so on, and I don't know what to think of it. It was quite weird, the way things went. And as NMD mentioned earlier in one of the questions, one mistake and it's over. And sometimes it's not even your mistake, so it's a bit sad.
Yeah, I mean, we saw some of the qualifiers, especially the German qualifier and the French qualifier, of course, typically being the most well contested, mostly being decided by some, shall we say, rather more unsavoury things, unfortunate, say mistakes, bumps, or bugs, and such like that, ruining some people's runs. So we could have certainly seen a few different names pop out here, but notably, we have such exceptions as exactly Mi4 you mentioned there from the the Nordic qualifier, pardon me. We had Coco, who also encountered main problems, and Massa as well, one of the bigger players, Onyo and such from the German qualifier. NMD, I understand previously you were perhaps alluding to the fact that this wouldn't be the full representation of what your top 16 would look like on a different style of maps which we're more used to. Do you feel it was mostly the style of the maps which kind of resulted in some of these surprises happening, or would you put that down to some of the more unfortunate comings of what we've seen during the qualifiers?
I don't think you can judge the maps by picking out the skill players of the players in, because then basically you can ask the question, should anybody of these be in? Because different maps might change a different outcome in most of the regions, or at least the biggest regions. But the problem is, like Nevermind alluded to, with Massa being out, which was basically a bug from what I understand. That is a problem with just having one-step qualifiers and just 3 maps in the qualifiers. Now Massa, one of the biggest stars and biggest profiles in the games, he is sponsored by the biggest, or one of the biggest organizations that is in TrackMania. He's out for until May, and then the playoffs will happen. So we miss that potential marketing from Big, and we miss out on seeing one of the best players in Massa playing. But I think the best player for me personally who is out is Aurel. He was the best in the show match, I believe, and then he got fucked over, if that's the correct word. And then again, the same thing happened in the qualifier. I believe this format is best suited for him, at least from the people who is out. And I also was kind of surprised by Onyo. I was thinking, to be honest, that this was gonna be usual. He trains a lot and then show up to an offline event and doesn't reach the top. But to be honest, he was probably my best player in the German qualifier, and he ended up being knocked out also in the last map. But from what I understand, that was his mistake. And like Nevermind said, Dunste is probably the one who surprised me the most. I expected Mi4 to have a quite easy timing, if you can say that, to make it. And I believe that Dunste himself said that Mi4 should take this 3-0, win pretty much every map. But he did some mistakes, and it was his fault that he didn't make it. So I guess I mean, I had some Twitter bets. I believe I missed out on the Portugal and the Nordic, and I ended up with 11 out of 14 picks. So you could say that it is possible to pick the correct winner, but there's also the possibility of a random thing happening, and then you are fucked for 6 months. And yeah, but that's also a good thing that we saw. Gillies himself said, SoftyB himself said that there shouldn't be just one step in a qualifier when the season itself is so long, because, yeah, like I said, now you have to wait for 6 months until the next season, if there is a next season.
Of course. I mean, setting with a beta example, I suppose we can assume this is their kind of time of testing the waters, seeing what kind of things they can change, what kind of formats they feel are working and aren't working. But in respect of what we've been mentioning a lot throughout here, and the maps of which have been present in this competition, which have been a deciding factor in people wanting to play this kind of tournament and the impression it's been given by this tournament and such like that. So two of the three maps which were given in the first pack, I believe one of them was made by Wouter. As you guys will know him from one of his more recent projects, the Four Styles Cup tournament. Four Styles Cup, of course. The map associated with that, of course, the previous iteration with that, and his competition maps he has had previously. Also, we had Kiesler, who was also he had another map in this pack, who also has been very active recently in the competitive mapping scene with some very well-regarded maps recently. Also with one, I believe, recently being added to TMM, so certainly check that out, of course. And the third map for that we had was a Nadeo map, or a Nadeo style map, shall we say, of course, not one of the original campaigns, seemingly designed by a representative of the publishers of the game. Nevermind, when you first saw the pack, as I understand you said you tried the maps a little bit beforehand, were you surprised by the direction they were going with these maps? What kind of impression did it give you, when you saw the first pack?
Well, I mainly tried the Kisla and the water map, and it was pretty close to tech. Maybe besides on Kisla, that balance, which was quite random from what I've seen, and it turned out pretty random in the actual qualifier as well. But it was way too short of I don't know, basic style of mapping, let's say, that I don't really enjoy and I don't really like to play. And yeah, I won't discuss about the Nadeo map because that's not my style at all. I mean, I don't enjoy anything related to that. But that's me. It's maybe there are people that like that, and I know there are. But yeah, this made me mainly think if I should even put the time in. And yeah, thinking of it being 10 weeks afterwards. No, not 10 weeks, 10 stages. So even more weeks might be pretty time consuming, and maybe I won't have the time for it. So I'd say maps had quite an effect on me not participating, at least.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the maps were, as I said, quite a deciding factor for those who were kind of deciding to get involved in that regard. Now, NMD, of course, looking more from the outside in, as you said, from not being a player yourself, would you say the different style of the maps, would you say it contributed to the amount of players in general that decided to participate in such a tournament? And if so, what's your impression of that decision as a whole, would you say?
Okay, so from what I understand with talking with people is that yeah, they are not too fan of this style. It's too boring to just drive arounds and arounds. But again, I guess you see the best players in the game, they attend because if there is an event in TrackMania, we are used to just stepping up and playing it. And I guess that's a good thing about this event itself, and I think that should not be forgotten or unsaid. There is a good thing that this event is taking place, and it's a good thing that Ubisoft and Nadeo is actually showing that they are willing to support this event. But I also think they should use the community because, sure, Ubisoft, Nadeo might be experts in how to market this event, but I do not believe that Ubisoft, Nadeo is more experts when it comes to mapping like the community is. I said this before, and I don't want to say it again, but yeah, leave the mapping up to the community itself. And I believe this tournament has a bright future because now we have a machine like Ubisoft behind us, which can market this event like we as a community cannot, but allow us or allow the community, the mappers, to show what they do and have done for the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the amazing thing about this partnership between Ubisoft and Adeo, and of course, again, one of our most established driving forces behind the TrackMania in recent years being Softy B, is certainly something to behold, and certainly something we should all unite behind and work towards. Now, on release of the two most recent maps of which were added to this pack, that was what triggered, if any of you guys seen, a very large discussion, shall we say, in the TrackMania Champions League Discord, both on the quality of the maps and of the style of the maps in general. Now, if you guys haven't seen them, of course, one of them, I believe, Finish Line or something, pardon me, I've forgotten the name off the top of my head, a much smaller map, a much shorter map, and it seems exceedingly simple. Again, in the Deo style. Of course, again, this is all within a multi-lap setup. So again, all of them are tracks which are looping, of course. And the second one was a much longer map than what we have been used to throughout the competition previously. I believe it runs to about 1 minute and 10 or 1 minute and 15 seconds long. Again, distinctly within the Nadeo style. And what I then mean by that is there's no established tech parts, as in parts you would expect to see in tournament maps. And the same with any parts of which have been included from, say, Dirt, Speed, RPG, things like that. They're not taking from the competition parts which we're used to be seeing going forward. Now, I mean, first things first, the impression of the kind of Nadeo involvement in these. You guys were alluding to there about how, with such a great engine force behind this new project, how there is parts of this which should then kind of be left at least more in the hands of the community, allowing them a bit more freedom to express what they are truly capable of, especially in the terms of the maps. Now, this style, I suppose, will promote new players having success in this map pack and things like that. But I mean, what were your guys' feelings on the response to these map packs? I mean, we saw it was relatively heated, but we actually saw Gillies actually getting involved a bit, which I suppose could be looked at as more of a welcome thing, with Nadeo showing that they were clearly willing to take part in the discussion side of this. What did you think about his involvement in this, NMD?
Yeah, it's a good thing that you mentioned that he actually is involved and actually is responding to the community. Sadly, the way that the community approach him, I believe, is not the right way. Some people, which was not the majority, were actually trying to give him constructive feedback, but that sort of got lost in all the other feedback that went to personal attacks and, yeah, let's say insults, pictures being posted, not keeping it serious. So after a while, the conversation was closed, and I believe it's now moved private, and I believe they have come to some sort of conclusion, or at least have some progress, instead of just him being there answering basically 100 people at the same time, which I believe is sort of impossible. Let's just realize that this guy is also a human being. You cannot just write anything and accept that he will not be affected by it. And once again, I will say that Nadeo and Ubisoft being behind this is a good example, or a good thing. And then an example of this is that Gillies himself is actually active in the chat. If he's the right one to actually be approaching the community and being sort of the spokesman for this, I'm not sure. I believe that the community still view this as a Softy B event, which it might not be, but he's a guy the community trusts. He's been voted 2 times in a row the community person of the year, and pretty much, like I said, every event he does is better, is bigger, and the community seems to like it more and more. So if I were in the meeting of Nadia Ubisoft, I would say trust Softy B, allow him to make his ID come alive, and your job, sure, you can give some feedback, but maybe stay in the background and then do the marketing, and let the mappers, like I said, do the mapping part of it.
Yeah, certainly. Never mind, to bring you into this side of thing, I understand you managed to read through what was a plethora of messages regarding the feedback and such that was provided in the TrackMania Champions League Discord. Now, with as I said, Gillies' involvement, of course, Gillies being, and especially the early stages of TrackMania, one of the driving forces behind such tournaments, like you did mention, of course, that he was the one which you can credit things like ESWC, WCG, things like that. So the guy certainly has some pedigree, and I feel in some cases there was an issue with trust towards Hillis, I suppose, perhaps. With his time that he spent kind of in the shadows, but also we have the pedigree of such people like Softy B coming in, exactly as NMD said, being the winner of the being nominated for Community Person of the Year for the last 2 years. But based upon that conversation, Nevermind, what was your impression towards at least the constructive parts of the discussions which did manage to go down? Where did you feel that we were going to be able to work towards something to positive on this, or do you feel the maps kind of set a precedent in this, that we're going to be working towards something that's in a different direction of what we're used to? What was your impressions from it?
Well, first of all, I've also saw that Gillies mentioned the lands and that he tried to do a lot of stuff, and he mentioned many times that were a lot of negative people inside the community that made him stop it, which, yeah, I'm not aware. I don't know anything about that, so I won't say anything against it or about it. But was a quite interesting view he had onto it, which he didn't let go, like for all the 1,000 and something messages that were going on in there. So I guess he really had the grudge on that. There was also another point with the maps, which was heavily discussed by him and the rest of the people there. And that was maps that are fit or that have the focus on the spectator. And he also mentioned at some point that from the qualifier, the community maps were the ones that were horrible from this point of view. Which was, I guess it triggered even more negative reactions, so to say, to call them nicely.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think his is quite normal regarding this. He mainly tried to explain what his idea was, which was fine, but he expects people to to follow him blindly into it without any kind of feedback, so to say. I think that's not the best way to change something 180 degrees after the previous things that Softy did, mainly him as organizer, happened, and they were quite a great success and a pretty big step forward for TrackMania as a game in the past years. I guess that's mainly what the outrage was about, and if he basically wants to stop this in any way, I think the kind of maps that are being released right now are not the way to go. This has to change. As has been in TrackMania for every single tournament that we had so far, and every single competition, the maps were built by the community, and they always show that quality content can be provided if you pull out the requirements for what you want. He also mentioned a lot the success that the Rater had, which, yes, of course, the Rater had a really great success with TrackMania, but 80% of that is because it's the Rater and he was big before starting TrackMania. And I don't think just going for something that's, I don't know, somebody pulled it out, so to say, and you try to do the same and expect to reach the same viewership, I don't think it's gonna work like that. If you think about it, take a look at the competition that we have like all over TrackMania. If you look in the events discords, or mainly the French discords, that there are a lot of people that are organizing tournaments, and they try to somehow copy the Rater kind of style competitions, and they never succeed anything, not even 1% of what he did, because it's not the same thing, and it won't be the same thing.
Yeah, for sure. Now, just as you being a mapper yourself, this is a point I wanted to bring to you specifically. How, what would be one thing you as a mapper would be looking like if someone was to tell you to make a spectator-friendly map? What kind of things does that ring in your head with respects to how you would decide and how you would format a map?
To be honest, when I was a beginner, or when I started the game, basically, I also watched a lot of YouTube, because mainly as a beginner you watch that because you want to know what's it about. And the most fascinating maps were the ones that had the most crazy stuff in them, not the ones that are super basic and nothing basically happens. It's really boring to watch something that's really short for a long time, that there's nothing really happening in there. Like, there were a lot of press forward maps that were amazing to watch back then, because I didn't know that they were press forward and they looked crazy. Or other maps that had also multi-style, which provided a lot of transitions, passages, and all that stuff. And seeing skilled players driving them smoothly was very entertaining. And overall, I think after all, this is a racing game. It's easy to follow if skilled players take on a close race, and you basically see who's winning, who's losing. I don't think it's rocket science, to be honest.
Yeah, I suppose you can look at it as kind of stripping away the complications a bit too much, and in a sense, I can see where they're looking at to that, as in making these maps a bit more presentable to players who may not be of a higher skill level, and especially if they are looking to bring in a lot of viewership, something that's going to feel a bit more approachable to them, as in at least if we're looking at, say, the TrackMania World Championship final. Of course, regarded as one of the very best match, one of the very best spectacles we've had recently, in regards to very high skill level being exhibited, a very close match and a very enjoyable match to watch. But at least regarding that, if you're an outsider looking in, you've never played the game before, I can imagine that looking a bit of a daunting task ahead of you, so to speak, as in thinking, wow, if I need to get to the top of this game, I need to be able to do that, basically. Or if I want to get into the game, I'm going to be expected to be doing things like that. So at least with the new style of maps coming in, and the argument that Hillis is putting towards having a more spectator friendly style, do you believe this is the right way to do it, NMD, or do you think the established setup, as I said, was as in, would you kind of look at it as if it wasn't broke, don't fix it kind of way? Or do you like the direction they're going in with the reasons they've put behind it?
Okay, so I believe we're actually getting into the core part of what this tournament actually is and why we see the maps. It's because they say it's viewer friendly, and the maps we saw at TrackMania World Championship wasn't viewer friendly and it was confusing. 100% disagree with that, and I even spoke to Gillies himself after the grand final. He didn't know who I was, which I guess many people don't know who I am, but he said he is out of touch of the community, and yeah, he didn't follow the scene too much. And he also said in the same conversation that this grand final is what esport is about. This is close matches. Everybody can win it from the start to the finish. So I'm not sure why we ended up with these kind of maps. They say that they're supposed to be viewer friendly. It's a racing game. It's a start and a finish block. People who watch the Twitch channel are gamers. They know what a start is. They know what a finish is. They know what a checkpoint is. Maybe there's too much scenery going around, and maybe it's too hard to handle. You say that, or give an example that maybe viewers will appreciate the skills more if they can drive them up themselves and then see it. I disagree, because I certainly put the TrackMania World Championship the highest, because I know I can never achieve that. I can never drive those lines. I know that the level those players have, I can never do. I can drive the maps kind of okay and probably get in a 1 second, let's say, margin of the best players on the map, but I cannot do that in the TrackMania Champions League. So we see that that is the ultimate style of it. But at the same time, I had this sort of idea, or it crossed my mind today, that TrackMania for me is like martial arts. It's the only thing in the sports I follow closely, and you have the multiple styles of fighting put together as a martial arts. Maybe TrackMania is trying to be that with the multiple styles. You put all the styles together and then see what is best. But at the same time, many people will argue that boxing is the pure art, is like the closest you can be. And if you master boxing, then you are the ultimate martial artist or the ultimate fighter. And I will say that is the same thing for me in tech. If you are the best tech player, to me, you have accomplished what is the hardest thing to do in tech, because that's the biggest player base, and that's where the most professional players train the hardest and try to become the best. So to say that we end up with these maps because they're supposed to be viewer friendly, I mean, I showed my match, or I showed the final to my family during Christmas because I wanted to show why I traveled from Norway to Paris to actually watch people play, and they understood it. So if you watch that the average esport fan, they will understand what the start and the finish line is. They will understand that four players are trying to beat each other. So yeah, I don't buy that viewer-friendly things. But maybe 1 year later, I'm totally wrong and TrackMania has blown up. But I will then leave that back to actually Ubisoft supporting the game and then being the marketing force behind it and doing stuff we as a community cannot do, and marketing into different channels and gathering new audiences. So yeah, I'm not agreeing with this being viewer friendly more than the TrackMania World Championship.
I mean, the one of the key points as well of that, and to carry on from what you were saying there, as in your own personal experience of bringing people into the game who were not, haven't really seen this game, as in, showing your family why you do travel such long distances to Paris and such. Like example, when I was doing a lot of the Force Styles Cup content, streaming it, and what I was watching when people were actually paying attention to the finals cast as well, is you were having people introducing their friends to this. I had friends who have never played or seen TrackMania before watching this and being astounded, being amazed that people can hit this high. They were seeing this as being like, no one could do something like this without crashing. No one could do this fast, and no, all the loopings and all the complicated parts of TrackMania. And I feel, well, I do embrace the attitude of letting it be simpler so people feel it to be a bit more accessible, hopefully going to get growing our scene as well as the viewership side of the community. I also feel it's important to give a platform for the very best mappers to do what they do best and the very best players to do what they do best, which we did have issues with the map being so simple as a result. So I guess one of the argument points I was always talking about, for example, with TMM, is that when the maps become more simple, in the case of TMM, compared to other tournaments, maybe tournaments for harder maps, say ESL or TMPL and such like that, well, you do see closer rounds in the sense of, a smaller map. The mistakes are always more punishing, which clearly caused an issue in the qualifiers and such with, when it's a simple map, that means you're going to have to go tighter to the edge. You're going to have to take more risks, try and go for more exit speed, which, I mean, that will catch even the kind of best players out, so to speak. Namely, we saw mistakes being made, and unfortunately, of course, some things you can't predict with the likes of bugs and such, which did seem to leave players with a bit of a bitter aftertaste, kind of moving forward in regards to that. But going forward, in terms of the Champions League, of course, after this big conversation, which did happen in the TrackMania Champions League Discord, there was, as I believe one of you mentioned, a private conversation which was had between those who were giving constructive feedback and as well as some established members of the scene who did ask to become part of it, to look at what the feedback was being given, to give more feedback in a place where you're more likely to be heard. But what do you guys imagine from this going forward? As in, we're due a summary that's due to be happening soon. I'll bring you into this, NMD. Do you believe we're due to see any changes as a result in this beta season? Or do you think this is something they're going to take on board, jot it down in the notes, so to speak, and come back to it once this tournament's finished? What kind of impression have you got from that?
Okay, so yeah, there was talks with or private conversations, and I hope that the people who are there, they show that or they say that they trust a guy like SoftDB. So maybe Nadio again see that we trust him. He is a community representative, and he showed that by asking again. He asked Spam who was the best endurance mappers for his cup. So obviously, SoftDB is looking for the best mappers in the community to build the maps. If there's going to be some changes, I'm not sure, but I'll get my answers tomorrow when I'm supposed to do the podcast with him, or I wait for the summary. If I have to bet, I'll guess 50-50, maybe after 3 stages, after more maybe discussions, maybe there will be some changes in the maps. I'm not sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting to kind of look at the difference in opinion, and I suppose a lot of that comes down to the side of the fence you're sitting on. I mean, Hillis, in a sense, as he has freely admitted, has had a bit of a disconnect from the community going forward. In the past few years, so to speak, with example notable uh, vacuums of Nadio being involved. I mean, you need look no further than 2017 when there was no prime time tournament, so to speak, to crown a world champion, which I would lay at the feet of the people responsible for the game in that sense. Whereas it looked towards we're possibly heading for the same thing in 2018, if not for the efforts of such like Softy and things like that. It seems that almost he was as much a part of that as Nadeo was, which does leave some kind of questions going forward. But as I said, it's a very positive thing that they are taking such an active involvement going forward, and that they are showing willingness to discuss with us on almost a scale that we haven't really seen before. I mean, we haven't seen such levels of engagement from Nadeo going forward. I mean, but can I ask, nevermind, going forward in this tournament, say you put yourself in Hillis or Softy B's shoes, going forward in the beta, would you change anything specifically, be it about the maps to, would you have it being completely now player controlled, as in from established players of the scene, established mappers? Or is there anything else you would go through on it which you think sticks out to you as something which could have been done better?
I guess, yeah, changes could be made, but I don't think they will be done just as soon. I think they will go more for an approach like leave things as is, let it go on, and then get feedback at the end and change everything based of that, which would be understanding. I would personally prefer for, I don't know, like basically I can only watch it at this point. I would personally prefer maps that were in the style of Spam Weekly, Frostbill Weekly, where you actually have real parts of each of the styles, and it's way more entertaining to watch. Laps being longer, races are closer. I think it's way better than what we have right now. As you mentioned also in one of the maps being 18 seconds and it's only platform. I don't know how entertaining that one can be, but we will see. I guess time will tell.
Yeah. I mean, going forward with the rest of the tournament, I mean, do you feel, of course, well, this is early stages and we haven't managed to grasp the full champions mode. Well, actually, circling back to that point, how big of an impact do you feel now that we know the players that are involved? Of course, do you see the champions mode shaking up who we are going to see coming out on top when all is said and done?
Well, I think champion mode deserves a try, first of all. We haven't really seen it in action, and maybe it's okay to give it a chance. I think the main issue of the cup itself right now is maps. Maybe champion mode could work. We have to see.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Champions Mode is what was one of the main kind of points of contention on this. But NMD, from seeing the actual people who have qualified themselves, now that we know the kind of precedent that's been set, as in, the style of the maps are made clear, the Champions Mode system is made clear, is there any favourites which stick out to you as who we might see taking home the shall we say the beta stage of the first edition of the Champions League.
Surely, to me, there are a group of favorites before or right after it. I would say that Kappa, Bren, who both had the best times in the qualifiers. Bren number 1, Kappa number 2, and then I would say a guy like Pack, who won the Stadium Esports League back in 2016, I believe, is obviously a guy you should never count out. And then I also had Carl Jr. on there, but I spoke to him and he said he might be too busy to actually give everything he has, and if you don't give everything he has during what is 10 stages, I guess you want to come out on top. If I am to predict a winner, it will be between Brand, Kappa, and Pack. But if we continue to see them going forward with TrackMania Champions League's map, I believe a guy like Bren, who has shown that he can handle multiple styles, he's RPG player, he's successful at Senator Cup, and lately he's also been improving at Tech Cup, so he can somewhat keep the pace like Kappa and Pack on the tech sections, and then maybe beat them on the more tricky sections like we see on the Champions League. If I'm to predict the winner, my money would be on Bren. If I get 1 million planets in return this time, I'm not sure. I guess the odds are quite low on Bren to win it all.
Yeah, exactly as you said, Bren being very much of a well-established multi-style player, and also one who factors very well with obstacles, having a very strong RPG background. So I suppose his versatility will go very well for himself in a tournament like this. Another point in regards to those who were involved. Now, if we're looking at this as a Nadeo-style map tournament, then I think it will be very interesting to see players like Danik B and Roland, who have been very strong on Nadeo maps. Of course, Roland was very well known for his exploits in Nadeo maps, especially on TrackMania Nations, being very strong on that type of map. However, of course, that is only coming into time attack style, not necessarily taking into account the type of consistency which is needed from this league. But never mind, after seeing everything that's kind of came about, so we've kind of went through that already. We've seen everything new that's been introduced. We've seen the involvement of Nadeo being a lot higher than it has, but we've also seen the response to this being a bit negative going forward. But how would you say that TrackMania Champions League is looking to turn out? Do you think so far that we're looking forward to a good spectacle with the kind of players and maps that are on offer, or do you still feel a bit sceptical and perhaps a bit negative based upon what's been presented to us so far?
I think the base idea is good, and with adjustment, it can become really good. But I'm a bit skeptical about the point it is right now, because there are a lot of people that are against it, and they don't agree with how everything is presented. So maybe working on that could be maybe in the right direction after all. We'll have to see. But I personally will keep watching it and see how it goes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at the very least, I mean, from people looking like, of course, we as us three, of course, looking into this, we have been players who have been keeping track. Well, of course, shall we say, we've been individuals keeping track. I'll make sure to classify you correctly.
NMD.
NMD, of course. I don't want to be. I don't want to be misrepresenting you, of course. But looking into this as players who have a kind of similar look to it, so to speak, as in we have been part of this scene for quite a time. I guess it is interesting that it's shaking things up, be it looking at it as a positive or a negative. It's still something that I'm going to keep my eye on, because it's something I want to see how it's going to happen. Like I don't know if you guys will have seen, say, these comedy shows, and they put a little frame up before, and it's like a clip, say a wave coming in and on a shore or something, and there's a little person there, and it's what's going to happen after the break kind of thing. Are they going to get swept away? Is it going to miss them? Like it's the suspense it's giving us, because we don't know what's going to happen. There's so many new things introduced that are going to take effect. There's so many factors that we didn't have previously. Nadeo's involvement, Ubisoft actually, taking this into account, a new style things like that. But NMD, do you have any predictions for how this will work going forward? Do you see any developments happening that we're maybe not aware of, or would you care to take a stab in the dark as to how the TrackMania Champions League will be looking going forward?
If I'm honest, I do actually think that this will end up being a success in the end. I believe the community of TrackMania, we are desperate for events. Now the actual game developer is here. They are supporting an event with one of the community representative in the head staff. So maybe a rough start, but when we look back at it, it might be a success story. And hopefully that will happen before the summer. I said to myself that I will see how the TrackMania landscape look when the summer comes, and then make a decision if I want to stick around and see a future in it. And maybe this is the perfect opportunity, because to me it feels like either zero or a hero. Either this totally breaks everything. We have already lost some events in Giant Cup and the E-Corp guys. To me, they told to me that this news maybe not the best news for them and dropped the motivation for them. But if TrackMania gets big because of this event, I guess more potential organizers will come in, willing to support event organizers like myself and others, and maybe the esport scene in TrackMania will sort of blossom and get big. So it's 0-100. If I had to bet, I will pick that in the summer we will be happy. But if I had one wish to make before I don't know if we will end it soon, but if we are, my final wish would be to see a sort of playoffs the day before the Serrator Cup. We already have 6,000 TrackMania fans going to see Serrator himself and to see TrackMania. Why not? Why don't we, as a community and Nadeo, take advantage of that, and the day before show what we think and the community sees as an esport, and then it can be a weekend of TrackMania instead of just one day with 3 matches. Certainly, that would motivate me to go to an event more than just to go to one day and pay all the money to watch 3 matches. I guess that's my final words on that topic.
Yeah, for sure, and that is a very interesting idea going forward. That gives the average viewer of Zerator a lot more of a background than what TrackMania really is. It introduces them not only to the style which they're used to seeing, of course, the typical Zerator style, but the style of which we can bring to them and what they can be a part of course, holding such a great standard of which which TrackMania has been known for, of course. With many matches over time, even from this year, many of the Match of the Year candidates in the TM Awards, hosted by none other than our lovely NMD, were extremely high quality across the board. So, I mean, we definitely do have a lot to offer. It's just a case of now having the right people involved to get that established, of course, and to show them the right thing, I guess, is the key thing to keep the interest going. But I mean, rounding off of that today, we do have some questions in the chat of which we can go to, and we can double check on that. But for either of my two lovely guests of which we have today, was there any other points in regards to TrackMania Champions League which you feel we should discuss, or any other points which interested you specifically?
Should I go first? I can go first since I took the word. I have 2 sort of topics that might be going under the radar. The first thing is that there's only 1 week from the announcement until the actual qualifiers. Some people having an exam period in the time of January. I spoke to Raisons, which many consider to actually be suitable for this format, might be actually one of the biggest favorites, at least now that we know that the maps are Nadeo based. He cannot play because he has exams during that period, but probably would be free for the rest of the season. And also, there has been, when the endurance format was announced, there was this argument or saying that, okay, Kappa, Massa, and players like that, they don't suit this endurance format. I don't know on what background you say that on, because we have never seen people actually go full hard and try actually to get consistent on endurance races. Kappa at least showed that he proved the haters, I don't know if haters is wrong, but the doubters wrong. He got the 2 of the 3 best match times. Map 2 and map 3, he had the best map time. And also Massa, which many consider to be one of the biggest players to be out, he also showed that when he puts his mind to being consistent, he can be consistent. I think he's risky in matches because he thinks that pays off. So yeah, before you make a sort of conclusion and say that this format doesn't fit this player, I don't think you can say that, but you can, of course, think that because it's brand new, nobody knows who this really suits. But in the end, we see that the best players in TrackMania ends up being the best players in TrackMania.
For sure, and it was an interesting point you brought up there in regards to the qualifiers being such short notice, which, especially around the exam period, that did almost count out some incredible players, exactly as you're mentioning. I mean, Race Hands, very well known for being very versatile and also a phenom on Nadeo maps, of course, one of the most widely recognised Nadeo map hunters in that regard. So it certainly has had its effect, but of course, I believe one of the kind of themes of which we've been seeing in regards to the communication for TrackMania Champions League is it is defined clearly as a beta stage. Not all of the information is available at the moment. The prize pool isn't available. The advertising plan hasn't been fully released and things like that, which is all fair enough because we're testing the water, so to speak. We're seeing how it's going to move going forward. So well, I would have liked it to have been done differently. It's what I'm finding myself saying a lot with things like that. Is that, well, I might not agree with it happening. I can understand that they probably have a reason for it. You know, it's it seems to be that there is a plan in place. Just we might not know all the details of it, but let's get the kind of rough edges smoothed away. Well, we're still in the beta phase, of course. I mean, with that kind of side of things, do we think that that as well affected the kind of amount of people that were playing? I mean, was there any notable people other than that I mean, did you Nevermind know of anyone that was kind of not playing as a result of this? As I know, of course, quite a few of our teammates didn't participate due to the kind of other things that were going on at that time. I mean, I don't know if you've kind of got any inside information in M&M that I didn't.
As far as I know, only Igor was in this situation, as he had some exams and tests for his final year of high school, I think it is, which was one of the reasons. I don't know about others, if they had the same problems, but he's the only one I know.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And was there any points you thought we should address on this going forward that maybe we have surpassed or glossed over, perhaps?
I don't have any topic specifically, but I think one of the things I want to mention, this whole, maybe not for the beta, but maybe for the official version of it, advertisement should be better. I mean, I know it was all a surprise and a special announcement and stuff, but I think it was pretty poorly advertised, and it still is right now. I mean, there are a lot of people that even don't know about it, or they don't even know what it is, which is not really okay for something that's supposed to replace the World Championship of the game. Another point that I want to mention is that if this is going to move forward in the best possible way for the actual community and for the ones that are aiming at to get, I suppose, would be Nadeo actually working with the community and not imposing all of their rules like they say we follow. It has to be a collaboration, not a order follower kind of direction.
Yeah, I'd agree with that in the sense it needs to be exactly as you said there, a collaboration. I think that's a very good way to put it. But to move over to the questions of which we were given, so we've got one from our lovely Bits, one of the champions actually, from Lithuania. So we were provided a question of, do we think that the 2 weeks between stages is too much to keep the interest of the viewers going? Now, I'll kind of expand on that to a two-part question. Well, giving you my thoughts on it. The 2 weeks per stage, I think that's a bit too much because it takes up a bit of time for the beta phase. The beta phase, I don't think, should be lasting from now until basically the start of June. I think that's well, it depends what kind of grand plans they have going forward, I guess. I guess that's another good thing to take into account but again, of course, that's information we don't necessarily have at the moment. And also, I feel if we were a bit more flexible with the weeks, we could have avoided such conflicts between the popular LAN events. Either if this was to be a shorter stage, from 1 week between each stage, then perhaps we would have been able to put it after the LAN events and allow people to get hyped up from it, from watching some great events, Gaming Winterfest, GA and such like that. But if I kind of bring you into this a little bit, never mind, did you prefer when we were dealing with things like TrackMania Pro League and such, where it was a week by week kind of stage format? Or do you think, in the sense they have done it differently, in the sense of it being 2 weeks? Do you think that's better for the players and the viewers, or do you believe there's any sort of specific party which would suffer from that?
Well, it was definitely better for the viewers because there were fresh things to see, I suppose. But I remember in the season 2 of the MPL, maps were changing quite a lot, quite frequently. And I personally had quite an issue with training because of work, and I had also uni at that time. So it was quite demanding to properly train all the maps. Also, it was pretty difficult maps. So back then it was not that good to have them like only 1 week, but there were also people that preferred it that way. So I guess opinions can be split here. With the current TMCL, I guess 2 weeks would be too long because the maps, in my opinion, don't require as much practice as those needed. And also, I've heard only 2 of the 5 are changing. I'm not sure if that's correct, but that's what I can remember at least. So I think 2 weeks is too much.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, looking at this from a viewer point of view, NMD, as I understand, of course, you're not necessarily going to relate as much to the players' side of things, being, of course, someone who doesn't play as much yourself. Do you believe that the transition to 2 weeks between each stage is a positive thing from the viewer's point of view? Or do you feel that might kind of siphon the interest from it?
Okay, so let's just make one thing clear. They want to sort of target the average viewer. I'm not the average viewer. I'm probably one of the more hardcore viewers. I had no problem watching TrackMania 2 hours, 3 hours a day during the week. I would find time. I would probably skip to watch Netflix instead of watching TrackMania. But then I would not think that the average viewer would do that. Maybe do it weekly, so you know that every Sunday or every Saturday there is TrackMania. So there is sort of a constant reminder. You get in a content system that you know, sort of like the TTCs of TrackMania at the moment. If you have played TrackMania for a while, you know that on Thursdays there are going to be TTC. I guess that's also a good marketing strategy for an event organizer. You can inform people that, okay, for a 10 weeks period, every Saturday and Sunday there's going to be TrackMania matches. But the only way, or the only reason for this being so long, which I agree on is too long, is for them to maybe test out the marketing and maybe make TrackMania bigger, because then you need more time instead of just making it 10 stages during, let's say, 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then bring out the season 1 and gets all the big start of it. That's my only assumption. I might be totally wrong, but who knows?
Yeah, true. I mean, it's a lot of good points there as to, again, it just does seem to factor a lot into the plan of which they're kind of going to put towards this. Now, I understand you were the one with kind of the strongest opinion, at least out of us, in regards to the country slots distribution, shall we say. And a question as well from Astri. If you were to give 16 more slots country-based, or at least have a second qualifier for a top 16, and as well, if I expand to that, also perhaps including a separate qualifier for the rest of the world, or a last chance qualifier, do you believe this would have been a waste, or a better attempt of having an overall better level?
Okay, so if there is a second qualifier, I would not do the slots again, because then you end up with, let's say, UK has to make one more player go in. That would probably be you then, because now you can finally try. You know that pack is not there, and you can probably beat everybody else. I guess the same situation is in Canada. The sort of tier 2, the people below Carl Jr., now they can attend. but I will be more favor of an open qualifier if there is more slots to be given, because then everybody has an equal chance, and you already have countries represented, you already have regions represented. But I know this is a beta season. I would not be open for that now. Let's just see this play out. But for the next season, I do believe that 32 slots is a good way, and then you can narrow it down to 16 players for an offline event. Because if you start off a season with 16 players, how many of those are actually going to in playoffs? Is it just going to be 8 players like you see at Raider Cup? Or are there going to be 16 players? Because let's be honest, the championships mode is created for 16 players. You need 16 players at the playoffs. So I'm not sure why we have 16 players in the first place. But as of right now, just keep it this way and then make the changes for season 1 if we will ever see that happening.
Exactly. Use the beta phase for the reason, of course, it was intended. But yeah, I agree exactly with what you said there. I think it's key to get the changes in mind, but not necessarily to act upon them until we know how the full situation's panned out. But I guess, guys, I mean, that's the first impressions of TrackMania Champions League brought to you by our lovely selves. Of course, I'd like to, first of all, thank Nevermind and NMD for joining me. It's been a pleasure having you guys with me here. But I'll let you guys tell me, first of all, NMD, where can we find you? And I understand you also have some projects you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, I guess you can find me on pretty much every platform there is. I am mostly active on YouTube under HuntMania, and I'm also active on Twitter, pretty much commenting on my personal Twitter account. I guess you can see the name of it is Eirik Holdal. It's my personal one. I also comment other stuff there. And if you don't like other stuff, you can just go and follow HuntMania TM on Twitter. And yeah, some projects I'm working on. I'm, of course, daily working on YouTube projects and also working on articles. But I guess what people who are listening to this podcast will be most interested in is the upcoming podcast with SoftDB. I guess many questions will be answered because I don't think we have heard too much from him yet. And I feel like he might have some news to us about what is his role in it and how we actually ended up here.
For sure. And also, guys, don't forget to check out, of course, the established TrackMania tournaments, of which we have been seeing. There will be one hosted by none other than HuntMania, of course, the man versus man tournament, which will be taking place this weekend. So
that was what you were referring to. I was like, what project do I have going on?
Too many. You've forgotten about some of them.
Thank you, man.
I've got your back, as always. And never mind, not forgetting you, of course. Where can we find you? Where can people find you if they want to question you perhaps on some of the things you've said today, or just simply want to follow on to the life of the M&M team leader?
Well, I do have a Twitter. I don't really use it that actively, but yeah, I guess mainly contact me on Discord. That would be the easiest way to reach me. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't really have any other projects than my M&M team. That's all basically.
Oh, well, that's fair enough. I'm sure we'll see you many times out on track anyway. We'll be able to find you without a problem. Of course, one of the main players, of course, of the TrackMania scene, and certainly M&M primarily. Of course, also a big shout out to the ESAC Electronic Sports Arena Challengers, of course, making this podcast possible. Very much thanks to Erwin Weber, of course. And also, guys, don't forget to check it out. Of course, all of the links to the socials for ESAC are available at the top of your screen, as you can see, for Twitch, YouTube, Twitter and Facebook there. And of course, check it out for all of the kind of matchmaking TrackMania, which we'll be missing out on all these times. A great addition to the scene itself. And also for myself, if you want to catch up on anything I've been doing, check out at TM Scotsman and pretty much every kind of social media there is. I can't guarantee I'll be active, of course. You also see my Twitch link there. Feel free to come on and watch me complain and crash and pretty much everything I'm doing. But other than that, guys, it has been a pleasure. Thank you very much to those who are watching today and those who will be watching in future. We will, of course, be attempting to do more podcasts of this sort when we do have the relevant kind of topics available. Other than that, guys, I very much hope you have enjoyed it. It's a goodbye from me, and I can leave the last word with you guys if you just want to say your goodbyes, and then we'll sign ourselves off.
Yeah, I guess I can say thanks for actually being on the podcast. It's a good experience to be in just sitting back, relaxing, and waiting for the next question, and then just say what's on my mind instead of constantly thinking about what the next question should be. Maybe we have a future host of the TrackMania podcast here. Think you did a really good job with Scottie, better than myself at least, and it's been a pleasure. So, and thanks to everybody who has followed this podcast. It's been 1.5 hours. If you watched everything, you are one of the brave ones.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me as well, Scotty. It was a pleasure. And yeah, thanks for the guys that have been watching, asking questions and so on. Hopefully you enjoyed.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone did enjoy. We got some good questions in. Again, thanks for the guys asking the questions. And I hope to see you guys soon on any projects of which we do going forward. But other than that, that is it from us, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you next time.